I used to think people exaggerated when they talked about being watched. You hear stories online about stalkers and home invasions, and there's always a part of you that assumes the victim missed something obvious. Maybe they ignored a red flag or didn't lock a door or trusted the wrong person. After what happened to me 3 years ago, I don't think that anymore. Sometimes somebody can slowly work their way into your life without you realizing it, and by the time you understand what's happening, they've already learned everything about you. This happened in October of 2023. I was 26 and renting a small house outside of Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't a big place, just a one-story house in a quiet neighborhood with a fenced backyard and a detached garage. I lived there alone with my dog, a golden retriever named Max. Most of the houses on my street belonged to older couples or families with little kids, so it always felt safe. The kind of neighborhood where people forgot to lock their cars and left packages sitting on their porches all day. I worked from home as a graphic designer, so I spent most of my time in that house. Looking back, I think that's one of the reasons I became a target. My routine was predictable. Every morning I walked Max around 7, worked until 5, ordered takeout way too often, and usually spent my evenings watching movies in the living room. Everything started with something so small that I almost forgot it happened. One Thursday afternoon, I found a water bottle sitting on my front porch. It wasn't mine. I figured one of the neighborhood kids had left it there and tossed it in the trash. The next day there was another one. Same brand, same size. I remember finding it strange, but not creepy. Then, 3 days later, I found a folded piece of paper under my welcome mat. It was completely blank. I actually laughed when I saw it because it felt like some kind of weird prank. I asked my neighbors if their kids had been messing around, and they all said no. I forgot about it after that. A week later, I was walking Max after dark. It was around 9 and the street was almost empty. As I turned the corner toward my house, I noticed a man standing across the street near a mailbox. He was wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. I couldn't see his face because he was looking down at his phone. As I walked closer, he looked up and watched me. I remember smiling politely and giving a little nod. He didn't react. He just stared. I kept walking and eventually reached my driveway. When I looked back, he was still standing there, watching me. I went inside and didn't think much of it. People are weird sometimes. The next morning, I found another blank piece of paper under my doormat. This time I got a strange feeling. It wasn't fear exactly. It just felt wrong. I checked my doorbell camera, expecting to see some teenager playing a prank. Instead, I saw the man from the night before. He walked onto my porch at 3 in the morning, slid the paper under the mat, and then stood there for almost 2 full minutes staring directly into my camera. I couldn't make out his face because of the angle, but I could tell he knew exactly where the camera was. I called the non-emergency police line, and an officer came by later that afternoon. He looked at the footage and basically told me there wasn't much they could do. The guy hadn't threatened me or damaged anything. He suggested keeping my doors locked and calling back if anything else happened. That night I couldn't sleep. Every little sound in the house made me sit up in bed. Around 1 in the morning, Max suddenly started growling. He never growled at anything. I sat up and listened. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps outside. They were slow and deliberate, moving across my front porch. Then they stopped. I grabbed my phone and opened the camera app. The man was standing directly in front of my door. He wasn't knocking. He wasn't trying to get in. He was just standing there, looking at the door. I called 911 immediately. The dispatcher stayed on the line while officers were sent to my house. The man remained on my porch for almost 4 minutes before calmly walking away. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. I showed them the footage, and they took a report. Again, there wasn't much they could do. The next few days were quiet. Then things got worse. I started noticing little changes around the house. My backyard gate would be open when I knew I'd closed it. One of my porch chairs had been moved. One morning, my trash can was sitting in the middle of my driveway. It felt like someone was trying to let me know they had been there. I became paranoid. I started checking every window and door several times before bed. I bought extra cameras and installed motion lights around the property. My friends told me I was overreacting. They thought it was probably just some local creep looking for an easy house to burglarize. Then, one night I got proof that it was something much worse. It was around 11, and I was watching TV when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the backyard camera. I opened the app and nearly dropped my phone. The man was standing in my backyard. He was facing my house completely motionless. My curtains were open, and I realized he could probably see me sitting on the couch. I turned off the television and all the lights. I don't know why. I think some instinct kicked in and told me not to let him know I'd seen him. I watched him on the camera for almost 10 minutes. He didn't move. Then he slowly walked toward my back door. I called the police again. Before they arrived, he disappeared. The officers searched the area and found nothing. One of them suggested staying somewhere else for a few days. I ended up sleeping at my sister's apartment that night. The next afternoon, I returned home to grab some clothes. The second I walked inside, I knew someone had been there. One of my kitchen cabinets was open. I was sure I had closed it before leaving. Then I noticed something else. My bedroom door was slightly open. I always kept it closed because of Max. My heart started pounding. I walked into the bedroom and immediately saw that my closet door was open too. I called the police from outside. They searched the house and didn't find anyone, but they did find muddy footprints in my bedroom. The officer asked if anyone else had a key to the house. I said no. Then he looked at me and said something that made my stomach drop. Whoever came in probably didn't need one. He showed me the back window in the laundry room. The lock had been forced. After that, I became terrified of being home alone. I stayed with my sister for nearly a week. Eventually, I convinced myself the guy had moved on. Nothing happened during those days. No papers, no motion alerts, nothing. I went back home and tried to get my life back to normal. 2 nights later, I woke up around 3 in the morning because Max was barking. At first, I thought he needed to go outside. Then I heard footsteps inside my house, slow footsteps coming from the living room. I froze. Max stood at the edge of the bed, growling toward the doorway. I remember every detail of those next few seconds. My bedroom door was open about 6 inches. Through the crack, I could see part of the hallway. Then a shadow moved past the opening. Someone was in my house. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 while hiding beside the bed. The dispatcher whispered for me to stay quiet. I could still hear footsteps. Then a cabinet opened in the kitchen. Then another. Whoever it was wasn't trying to steal things. He was taking his time. A minute later, the footsteps stopped. Complete silence. Then I heard my bedroom doorknob move, very slowly. The door began opening. Max exploded into barking. I heard footsteps running through the house and then the sound of the back door slamming shut. Police arrived within minutes and searched the neighborhood. They didn't find anyone, but they found something else. Under my bed was a small backpack that didn't belong to me. Inside it were bottled water, protein bars, a flashlight, and a notebook. I still get chills thinking about that notebook. The first several pages were blank. Then I turned another page and saw my name written over and over. The next page had my work schedule. Another page listed the times I walked my dog. Then there were drawings of my house. One page showed the layout of my bedroom. The last page contained a single sentence. She finally noticed me. I moved out of that house the next day. Police investigated for months but never identified the man. About 6 months later, I got a call from a detective. They had arrested a guy in another county for breaking into a woman's house while she was sleeping. When they searched his apartment, they found dozens of notebooks filled with information about different women. One of those notebooks had my address written inside. The detective asked if I wanted to see his photo. I said yes. The second I looked at it, I recognized him. It was the man from my porch, the man from my backyard, the man who had been standing in my house while I slept. Apparently, he had no connection to me at all. We had never met. He saw me walking my dog one evening and became obsessed. The police believed he had been entering my house for weeks before I ever realized it. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if Max hadn't barked that night. Sometimes I think about how long that backpack had been under my bed before I found it. But the thing that scares me the most happened after I moved. About a year later, I was going through old footage from my security cameras because I planned to delete everything. I found one clip I had never seen before. It was recorded 2 weeks before I first noticed the water bottles on my porch. In the video, I leave for work at 8 in the morning. 20 minutes later, the man walks into my backyard carrying a folding chair. He sets the chair behind my garage where my cameras couldn't see and sits down. 8 hours later, I return home and never realize he had been there the entire day watching my house. He waits until I go inside and then quietly leaves. I don't know how many times he did that before or after. I don't know how long he'd been watching me before I ever noticed him. I only know one thing. Every night before I go to bed, I still check every lock in my house twice, and every time my dog suddenly starts barking at the front door, I get this horrible feeling in my stomach and wonder if somebody out there has been watching me again. I used to think that if somebody was stalking you, you'd know it right away. You picture a creepy guy sitting in a car outside your house or getting weird messages online. I didn't realize a person could slowly become part of your life without ever speaking to you. This happened in the summer of 2021 when I was 27 and living alone in a small house outside of Nashville, Tennessee. The house was perfect for me. It was in a quiet neighborhood with only a few homes on my street and woods behind my backyard fence. I worked at a dental office and usually got home around 6 every evening. My routine never changed. I'd get home, let my dog out, make dinner, watch TV for a few hours, and go to bed around 11. Looking back, I think that routine is exactly why I became a target. The first thing that happened seemed completely harmless. I came home from work one Tuesday and found my trash can sitting beside my garage instead of at the curb. I figured one of my neighbors had moved it for me. A few days later, I noticed my porch light was on. I never left it on because I hated wasting electricity. Again, I assumed I had forgotten. Then, one evening I opened my mailbox and found a photograph inside. It was a picture of my house, not a printed image from Google or anything like that. It had clearly been taken by someone standing across the street. There was no note and no envelope, just the photograph. I immediately looked around, but nobody was outside. I took the picture inside and honestly tried to convince myself it was some weird mistake. A week passed and nothing happened. Then I got another photograph. This time it was a picture of my backyard. That's when I started getting nervous. I called my brother and asked if he was playing some kind of joke on me. He thought I was kidding. The next morning I installed a doorbell camera and another camera facing my backyard. For a few days, everything was normal. Then, one Saturday morning, I woke up and checked my phone. I had several motion alerts from around 2 in the morning. I opened the first video and immediately felt my stomach drop. A man was standing on my front porch. He wasn't trying to get inside. He wasn't touching anything. He was just staring at my front door. He stayed there for nearly 5 minutes before walking away. The next clip showed him in my backyard. He walked around slowly, almost like he was familiar with the place. Then he looked directly into the camera and smiled. I called the police. An officer came by and took a report, but there wasn't much they could do. The man hadn't committed a crime. They told me to call again if he returned. After that, I became paranoid. I started checking my cameras constantly. I kept all my blinds closed. Every little noise outside made me jump. About a week later, I came home from work and found my back gate open. I knew I'd locked it before leaving. I checked the cameras. The footage showed the same man climbing over my fence at around noon. He stayed in my backyard for almost 2 hours. At one point, he sat on my patio furniture and just looked at my house. Then he left. That night, I barely slept. Around 3 in the morning, my dog suddenly started barking downstairs. I sat up and listened. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps outside my bedroom window. They were slow and deliberate. I grabbed my phone and opened the backyard camera. The man was standing directly outside my bedroom window. I called 911 immediately. The dispatcher stayed on the line while officers were sent to my house. Then, something happened that still scares me. The man slowly raised his hand and tapped on my window 3 times. Then he smiled. By the time police arrived, he was gone. They searched the neighborhood and found nothing. The following evening, my brother came over and stayed with me. We checked every door and window before going to bed. Around midnight, we heard a loud noise from the kitchen. My brother grabbed a baseball bat and we went downstairs together. Nothing looked out of place. Then my brother noticed something. The back door was unlocked. I always locked it. We searched the house but didn't find anyone. My brother insisted I stay with him for a few days. I packed some clothes and left. 3 days later, I returned to my house during the afternoon to grab more things. The second I stepped inside, I knew somebody had been there. A kitchen cabinet was open. One of my dining room chairs had been moved. Then I noticed muddy footprints leading toward the hallway. My heart started pounding. I called the police from outside. Officers searched the house and found nobody, but they discovered that one of my basement windows had been forced open. One officer asked me if anything was missing. I looked around and realized nothing had been stolen. That somehow made it worse. Whoever had entered my house didn't want my belongings. They wanted to be inside my house. I decided to move in with my brother temporarily. About a week later, detectives called me. They wanted me to come to the station. They showed me security footage from a gas station a few miles from my house. The man from my cameras had been seen there several times. They identified him as a local handyman named Eric. He had done work in my neighborhood before. Then, one detective asked me a question that made my stomach drop. "Did you ever have work done on your house?" I remembered that about 8 months earlier, a handyman had repaired my fence after a storm. I barely remembered the guy because we only spoke for a few minutes. The detective showed me another photo. It was him. Apparently, after fixing my fence, he'd become obsessed with me. They found dozens of pictures of my house in his truck, maps of my neighborhood, notes about my schedule. Then the detective said something I'll never forget. "We believe he had a key." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" He explained that when he repaired my fence, I'd left my spare key hidden inside a fake rock beside my porch. He'd apparently seen me retrieve it. The police believed he'd made a copy. Suddenly, everything made sense. The porch light, the moved furniture, the unlocked door, the photographs. He'd been inside my house. A few days later, they arrested him after another woman reported someone peeking through her windows. During the search of his house, police found a box containing hundreds of photographs. Most were of different homes and women. But one section was entirely about me. There were pictures of me unloading groceries, walking my dog, and sitting on my couch through the living room window. Then, they found a notebook. Nearly every page contained details about my daily routine. One entry read, "She leaves for work at 7:32. Another said, "She falls asleep with the TV on." The final entry was dated the night before I left my house. It said, "I almost stayed inside tonight." I couldn't sleep for weeks after hearing that. I kept thinking about what those words meant. Stayed inside where? The detective eventually answered that question. They found fingerprints in my attic. Apparently, he'd been hiding there occasionally after entering through the basement. He wasn't just watching me from outside. Sometimes he was inside the house while I was home. I sold almost everything I owned and moved to another city a few months later. I still have security cameras everywhere. I still check every lock before bed. And every now and then, when I hear a noise downstairs in the middle of the night, I remember something the detective told me after the case was over. He said that when they questioned Eric, they asked why he never attacked me or stole anything. His answer was simple. He said he liked pretending he already lived there. Somehow that scares me more than anything else.